Hello, friends. If you're curious about the movie Panda Plan 2024, you're in the perfect place. Don't forget to give this video a quick like, it really helps us out. And if you're new here, hit subscribe to stay updated on all the latest movie deep dives. Let's jump right in. It begins not with a roar, but with a quiet rustling in the bamboo forests of Sichuan, where a panda unlike any other naps in the dappled shade, unaware that his life, along with the fate of the entire region, is about to spiral into something wildly unexpected. Panda Plan is the kind of movie that sneaks up on you. At first glance, you think you're in for a charming, perhaps slightly goofy animated romp. But then the layers start to peel back, revealing a story packed with espionage, emotional depth, and a central mystery that winds through ancient secrets, high-tech heists, and the most unlikely band of misfits ever assembled beneath a cherry blossom tree. At the center of it all is Bao, a panda who's never quite fit the mold. Unlike his cousins, who are content to munch bamboo and drift through life with blissful simplicity, Bao has always felt the itch of something more. He asks too many questions. He dreams too vividly. He reads books other animals don't even glance at. His days are spent in the reserve, where he's become a local oddity, part legend, part joke. But beneath that furry exterior, Bao carries a fire that's about to be tested in ways no one, especially Bao himself, could have imagined. The story takes off when a mysterious drone crashes into the reserve, leaving behind only a fragment of data and a cryptic phrase that echoes like a prophecy: the plan is active. No one knows what it means. Not the park rangers. Not the scientists. But someone is watching. And as strange events begin to unfold across the sanctuary, animals disappearing, surveillance footage wiped clean, a strange glow seen in the woods at night, it becomes clear that something far bigger is underway. Bao's curiosity pulls him into the center of the chaos. After following a trail of encrypted paw prints, yes, paw prints, that only he can decipher, he stumbles upon a secret underground facility hidden beneath the reserve. There, he discovers the legacy of the Pandara, a long-forgotten clan of pandas trained not just in martial arts, but in intelligence gathering and covert operations. It's a wild twist that redefines everything Bao thought he knew about his heritage. Apparently, pandas haven't always been lazy loungers. At least, not all of them. The Panda Plan, as it turns out, was an initiative put into motion decades ago, during a time of global unrest, when animal-human tensions were nearing a breaking point. The Pandara were tasked with protecting a delicate balance between the natural world and technological advancement. But when the program mysteriously vanished, so did its history. Buried under vines, denied by records, and faded from collective memory. Now, the plan has been reactivated. And Bao, wide-eyed and thoroughly unqualified, is the only one left who can stop what's coming. Cue the unlikely team. Mei, a red panda with a hacker's brain and a sarcastic streak wider than the Yangtze River. She's been off the grid for years, running a rogue information hub from an abandoned satellite dish. Then there's Tank, a grizzly bear with a heart of gold and fists like steel, who once trained with the Pandara before leaving the order under mysterious circumstances. Add to that Jing, an acrobatic crane with a criminal past and a penchant for poetic violence, and you've got a team that shouldn't work, but somehow does. Their mission? Infiltrate a secret facility disguised as a wildlife research station, uncover the identity of the person or creature, reactivating the Panda Plan, and stop them before an ancient algorithm buried deep in the reserve's mainframe is unleashed. This algorithm, originally designed to create harmony between ecosystems and tech, has been corrupted. If activated in its current state, it could override every piece of environmental tech across the globe, triggering a collapse that would plunge natural reserves into chaos and throw the delicate animal-human balance into irreversible disarray. As Bao trains in the forgotten techniques of the Pandara, mental discipline, stealth movement, diplomatic persuasion, he begins to tap into a version of himself he never knew existed. It's not just about throwing punches or decrypting files. It's about belief. Belief in a past that was hidden. Belief in a future that hasn't yet been written. and belief in the idea that even the most underestimated panda in the forest might carry the spark of something extraordinary. What makes Panda Plan sing is its seamless blend of genres. One moment, you're watching a light-hearted gag unfold, Bao trying to squeeze into a stealth suit 2 sizes too small, or Tank accidentally demolishing a supply closet while attempting to whisper. The next moment, you're thrown into a high-stakes infiltration scene scored by pounding drums and flickering with tension, as the team maneuvers through laser grids and biometric scans to steal classified data. And then, just when you think the film has settled into a predictable rhythm, it pulls the rug out from under you. Halfway through the film, a major twist changes everything. The mysterious figure behind the reactivation of the Panda Plan? It's not a rogue AI. Not a traitorous scientist. It's Yao, Bao's long-lost brother, believed to have disappeared during a childhood landslide. Except Yao isn't the panda Bao remembers. He's hardened, philosophical, and terrifyingly calm. Raised by the remnants of a splinter faction that believed the Panda Plan should have been weaponized for control rather than protection, Yao now seeks to reset the balance by purging all tech from nature, permanently. The emotional core of the film turns sharply here. It's no longer just a story of discovery. It's a story of confrontation, between brothers, between ideologies, and between past and future. Bao must choose whether to destroy the system entirely or reprogram it, whether to fight his brother or redeem him, whether to follow the Pandara's rigid doctrine or evolve it into something new. Visually, Panda Plan is stunning. The animation shifts styles subtly depending on tone. The flashbacks to the Pandara archives are painted in brushstroke textures, evoking traditional Chinese ink art. The modern-day sequences hum with tech-infused realism, glowing interfaces and pulsing data streams illuminating shadowed forests and ancient temples. During one unforgettable scene, when Bao accesses the algorithm's central core, the film explodes into a breathtaking visual ballet of light and memory, as ancestral pandas flicker through time to guide his decision. It's part Tron, part Spirited Away, and entirely original. The climax is pure cinematic electricity. The team confronts Yao at the summit of Mt Yun, inside a reactor dome built beneath a forgotten observatory. Nature and tech collide. Vines strangle drones, neural links glitch in and out of sync, ancient mechanisms grind to life. And at the center of it all, Bao and Yao face off, not with fists, but with philosophies. It's the kind of ending that doesn't just resolve a conflict, it reframes the entire story. And yet, Panda Plan never loses its heart. It reminds us that bravery isn't about being the strongest or the smartest. Sometimes, it's about being the one who stays, who listens, who believes. Through Bao's eyes, we see not just the potential of pandas to be more than cuddly mascots, but the power of anyone to rewrite their destiny. By the time the credits roll, you're left with more than just excitement. You're left with a strange kind of hope. That perhaps there's a plan inside each of us, forgotten, buried, waiting. And maybe, just maybe, the world needs us to remember it now. Because the plan isn't just about pandas. It's about possibility. It begins in a city that hums not just with traffic but with the quiet static of secrets. Shanghai in 2024 isn't quite what the postcards promise. It glitters, sure, steel and neon slicing through the night, but beneath that polished gleam lies something more unsettled, something soft yet shifting, like smoke that's not supposed to be there. At the edge of this restless cityscape, tucked between old temples and new skyscrapers, a scientist named Mei Zhao steps into frame. The camera lingers on her face, sharp, inquisitive, weary. There's a silent question in her eyes, and the story wastes no time in answering it. Mei is not just any researcher. She's the leading conservationist at the National Biogenetics Institute, working on a classified government project codenamed Plan X. But everyone in the hushed corridors of her lab knows what it really is, the Panda Plan. A radical, futuristic endeavor to prevent the extinction of the beloved yet endangered species through advanced cloning, genetic memory mapping, and a groundbreaking behavioral integration protocol. The goal is not merely to recreate pandas but to reintroduce them with preserved instincts, emotions, memories, essentially, digital souls copied from living ancestors. It's part science fiction, and wholly controversial. Yet Mei, with her soft-spoken authority and precise determination, is its unwavering center. She believes in the ethics. She believes in the science. She believes in the pandas. The plot ignites not with a discovery, but a loss. Within the opening minutes, the Institute's prized specimen, an ancient panda named Bai Yun, dies unexpectedly during a routine sedation. Bai Yun wasn't just a genetic source. She was the living memory bank, a creature whose neural patterns were being mapped for integration into the first fully cognitive clone. Her death is a fracture in the project, but Mei remains composed. She insists they have enough data. The neural scans were complete. The memory lattices intact. They must continue. Enter the first sign of dissonance. A young, idealistic coder named Jian who works quietly in the Neural Integration Division. He approaches Mei one rainy evening, glancing nervously over his shoulder before slipping her a thumb drive. "There's something you need to see," he whispers. Later, in the solitude of her apartment, Mei plugs it in, and the screen fills with static before revealing jagged, distorted images from the project's neural simulations. Pandas behaving not like pandas, but like something else entirely. Hostile. Erratic. One scene shows a cloned cub in a simulation cage, biting through steel and flinging itself against walls, its eyes darting with a human-like panic. Mei watches in frozen horror. She demands answers the next day, but the upper administration responds with thin smiles and vague assurances. Some anomalies are expected, they say. It's part of the learning curve. But Mei senses the walls closing in. The data is being scrubbed. Jen disappears without a trace that evening. The camera shifts then, half a world away, to the bamboo forests of Sichuan, where the first live clone has already been released into a highly controlled wilderness reserve. Its name is Xiao, meaning Little Truth. A name Mei had chosen herself months ago. She had believed it would be the first glimpse of a better future. But Xiao is no ordinary panda. From afar, he moves like the others, eats bamboo, climbs, sleeps, but then comes nightfall. The surveillance drones catch him doing something wrong. He sits upright, stares directly into the camera, and begins tracing strange, symmetrical shapes in the dirt. Symbols not random, but methodical. As if remembering something not his own. As if dreaming. Meanwhile, Mei is forced into a new position. Her access to the project is revoked. She's reassigned, quietly demoted, and shadowed by government agents under the guise of security compliance. But her obsession grows. She can't let go, not of the drive Jian gave her, not of the flickering glimpses of Xiao that now haunt her sleep. So she does what she's never done. She breaks the rules. She hacks into the Institute's satellite feed. In the pale blue light of her apartment, she watches Xiao, night after night. And something inside her breaks slowly as she witnesses what no one else is seeing, or at least no one dares to admit. The panda isn't just learning. It's remembering. Not just bamboo groves and maternal warmth, but fire. Machines. Screaming. She sees it pant and twitch during sleep, sees it recoil from shadows. Then, one night, it vanishes. Gone. No broken fences. No evidence of escape. Just silence. That's when the tempo shifts. Mei finds herself followed. Anonymous notes appear on her windshield. Stop digging. But also, mysteriously, he knows. The narrative tightens like a noose. She flees to Sichuan under the pretense of a vacation. In reality, she's following the last known coordinates of Xiao's tracker. Armed with only a map and a pocket-sized neural scanner she wasn't supposed to keep, she plunges into the forest. The bamboo is thick, unyielding, the kind that hushes footsteps and amplifies paranoia. Days pass. Then a signal, weak but pulsing. And there, in a clearing, she finds him. Xiao Zhan. But not the cub she remembers. He's grown. Too fast. His frame massive, his eyes unreadable. He does not flee. He watches. Slowly, he approaches. And there's something in his gaze that halts Mei mid-breath. It is not wild. It is not tame. It is something else, a recognition. She kneels, whispering his name. He steps closer. Then suddenly, from the ridge above, a dart whistles through the air. He collapses. Men descend in black uniforms. Mei is shoved to the ground. A voice in her ear hisses, "You were warned." But just before she blacks out from the blow, she sees something glinting from Xiao Zhan's fur, a small metal shard embedded near his shoulder. Not a tracker. A transmitter. She wakes up in a cold, clinical room. No windows. A steel door. Interrogation begins. But Mei's resolve has hardened into something like fury. They threaten her. They accuse her of espionage. She says nothing. She just waits, because something's changed now. She's seen too much. And she understands. This was never just about pandas. This was about control. About what happens when we try to rewrite memory. When we twist nature into something programmable. Xiao Zhan wasn't broken. He was awake. He was remembering something buried in the code. The story doesn't tell us what that is. Not yet. It only leaves us with Mei, locked away, whispering to herself in the dark, "He knows." And somewhere, deep in the forest, something begins to move again. The room where Mei Zhao waits isn't designed for comfort. The walls sweat with condensation, and the light above her flickers with a rhythm that almost seems intentional, like a metronome counting down something unnamed. Time dissolves here. Her watch was confiscated. Her phone, gone. The voices that question her are faceless, always behind the mirror. They repeat themselves like echoes. What did you see? What did the panda do? But no matter how many times they ask, she offers nothing. Not because she's defiant, but because the answer is still forming, still blooming like a bruise beneath her skin. Then, one morning, or perhaps it's night, everything changes. Her door opens. No guards. No cuffs. Just a man waiting in the hallway, holding an umbrella and a smile that doesn't touch his eyes. "You're coming with me," he says. His name is Director Lin. They drive in silence, the city's underbelly giving way to the blurred greens of the countryside. Mei doesn't ask where they're going. She already knows. They arrive at Facility 9, a subterranean complex buried beneath a decommissioned military base. Lin leads her through corridors humming with fluorescent life, past rooms filled with silent monitors and redacted documents pinned to walls like forgotten secrets. Here, the truth begins to surface. Panda Plan wasn't about preservation. Not entirely. Lin shows her a chamber, glass walls, padded floors, rows of speakers embedded in steel. A panda sits inside. Not Xiao Zhan. This one is younger, marked with a subtle stripe of silver across its back. Prototype 12, Lin says. Fully integrated. No behavioral glitches. No memory residue. A clean slate. He turns toward Mei. You were right. The others failed because they remembered too much. So we fixed it. He says it like they're gods who finally got the recipe right. But Mei's eyes are drawn to the panda's face. There's nothing there. No recognition. No spark. Just silence. It chews bamboo like a machine running a loop. Breath in. Bite. Chew. Swallow. Repeat. It is perfect in all the wrong ways. That's when Lin tells her the real reason she's here. Xiao Zhan didn't escape. He wasn't stolen. He vanished off every satellite, every radar, because he disabled the signal himself. He wasn't following instincts. He was hiding. Because he knew what they were doing. Lin gestures toward a map on the wall, overlaying topography with neural frequency scans. He's still out there. Somewhere in Sector 4B. But we can't catch him. He's always one step ahead. You saw him, Mei. You connected. We need your help. What they're not saying is that they're afraid. Of what Xiao Zhen knows. Of what he's becoming. Mei hesitates for a long time before she agrees. Not because she wants to help them, but because she wants to find him first. They send her back into the forest. But this time, not alone. She's paired with a handler named Rui, ex-military, quiet, eyes always scanning. Their journey through the thicket is tense, measured, every footstep purposeful. But the forest has changed. There are no birds. The bamboo doesn't sway, it looms. And there's a pressure in the air, like the world is holding its breath. On the third night, they find the first sign, a symbol carved into a tree. Not claw marks. Letters. Ancient. Pre-Chinese. Rui brushes it off as coincidence, superstition. But Mei knows better. The symbols match what Xiao Zhen had drawn in the dirt months ago. They press forward, deeper into territory even the maps avoid. Mei begins to feel it. Something watching. Not stalking, not hunting. Just witnessing. And then, in the twilight hour when the world turns blue, Xiao Zhen returns. He doesn't charge. He doesn't flee. He steps out from behind a veil of trees, his fur dusted with soil and his eyes older than they should be. He meets Mei's gaze and for a moment, everything goes quiet. Rui raises his tranquilizer. Xiao Zhen growls. Mei doesn't hesitate. She throws herself in front of the barrel. "Don't!" she screams, voice shaking. "He's not what you think." Xiao Zhen stares, still as stone. Then he turns and disappears into the trees. But not before dropping something from his mouth. A small, rusted object. A micro-drive. Back at camp, Mei plugs it into her portable scanner. The data is corrupted, fragmented, but parts remain. Grainy footage. Audio logs. Not of the panda. Of a man. Jian. He's alive. The logs reveal his real mission. He had discovered layers within the neural maps, patterns buried in the genetic matrix that didn't originate from pandas at all. Signals. Memories that belonged to humans. Specifically, soldiers. The neural library had been cross-coded with data from old military archives. Project Guling, an abandoned bioweapon program that tried to embed human tactical instincts into animal hosts. Panda Plan wasn't just conservation. It was the resurrection of a war dream. Mei reels. All her work, her passion, had been manipulated. The loving conservationist front was just a smokescreen for something colder, something engineered for conflict. Intelligence masked as innocence. She makes a decision then. She won't bring Xiao Zhen in. She won't let them erase him like they erased Jian, like they erased the truth. They begin to run. Rui, surprisingly, follows her. Whether out of belief or disbelief is unclear, but he offers no resistance. They evade surveillance by dropping into the forgotten valleys of the forest, where signal dies and nature reclaims even the sharpest technology. In the heart of this uncharted green, they find Jian. Worn. Bearded. Alive. He's built a crude sanctuary, wood, vines, hacked drones. And he's not alone. A second panda is there. Smaller. Female. Another failed prototype, yet somehow thriving. Mei stares in disbelief. Jian explains everything. The clones that survived had done so by rejecting their programming. They weren't becoming monsters. They were shedding the layers forced upon them, reverting to something deeper, wilder, purer. They had memory, and from it They were rebuilding identity. Xiao Zhan arrives that night, leading a small cluster of pandas, runaways from the various labs and reserves, now free. Together, they move like a family, like something ancient reawakening. Mei watches as they communicate, not just through sounds or gestures, but something more subtle. Shared dreams. Patterned behavior that suggests memory passed like whispers between them. The pandas are evolving. Not into humans. Not into weapons. Into something new. But the calm doesn't last. Drones arrive. Then men. Guns. Lin has tracked them. He emerges from the dark like a shadow uncoiling. This ends now, he says. Mei stands before him. It already ended. You just didn't notice. A standoff unfolds beneath the moonlight. Guns raised. Pandas circling silently. Then Xiao Zhan steps forward, not with rage, but with calm. He faces Lin directly and does something no one expects. He bows. It's not submission. It's defiance. A declaration. That he remembers everything. That he chooses not to be what they built. Lin hesitates. Then orders fire. But the pandas scatter like smoke. The forest turns into chaos. Rui takes a bullet to the shoulder, protecting Mei. Jian pulls her into the undergrowth. Lin chases. For a moment, it feels like the forest will become a tomb. But Xiao Zhan turns the tide. He leads Lin away, through the trees, over ridges, into a gorge known only to those who've lived among its echoes. There, he traps him. Not with violence. With silence. With stillness. Lin finds himself surrounded, not by threats, but by truths he can't kill. Then Xiao Zhan disappears again. Back to the wild. The government calls it a failure. The Panda Plan is officially dismantled. Files erased. Names buried. The public will never know what really happened. But Mei does. Months later, she stands in a small reserve in Yunnan, one that's not on any map. Jian's sanctuary has grown. The pandas live unmonitored, untouched, free. She watches as Xiao Zhan emerges from the mist, older now. He does not approach her. He does not need to. Their connection is not one of ownership. It is of understanding. And somewhere, far from laboratories and lies, something begins again. Not in steel cages or neural codes, but in the rustle of bamboo and the quiet, enduring eyes of a creature who remembers what it means to be wild and what it costs to become human. Mei Zhao moves like someone carrying glass in her hands, not fragile herself, but aware of the world's capacity to shatter. Every line on her face is quiet testimony to a life lived in pursuit of preservation, not power. From the first moment she appears, standing beneath the sterile glow of her lab, Mei is painted with a palette of contradictions. Soft-spoken but resolute, scientific but empathetic, idealistic yet tethered to a deep, relentless realism. She is the moral compass of a world that has long since lost its direction, and yet even she doesn't fully realize how much of her own center has already been pulled off course. Mei isn't a revolutionary by nature. She doesn't burst onto the screen waving banners or hurling stones. Her rebellion is quiet, incremental. It's in how she tilts her head while watching Xiao Zhan on the monitor, how her eyes hesitate just before she signs off on a report that buries the truth under scientific euphemism. She is haunted not by failure, but by complicity, the knowledge that she helped build something she now begins to question. This slow-burning disillusionment is what defines her, and as the story unfolds, Mei transforms from observer to resistor, not in grand gestures but in the kind of small, necessary defiance that makes revolutions possible. There's a particular loneliness to Mei, too. No family is ever mentioned. Her apartment is clean but impersonal. Her meals are eaten alone. Even her interactions with colleagues carry a tension just under the surface, like everyone is playing a part in a drama none of them wrote but all of them must perform. She is close with no one, except perhaps by Yun, the aging panda whose death becomes the catalyst for the unraveling of the entire Panda Plan. And later, Xiao Zhan, who becomes less a subject of her study and more a mirror to her soul. In Xiao Zhan, Mei sees the question that's been haunting her for years. What does it mean to remember? Xiao Zhan himself is a marvel of storytelling, a character who never speaks a word, yet communicates volumes. At first, he's framed as a subject, a specimen, a scientific success. But as the story deepens, he reveals himself as something far more complex. He is not simply a panda, nor merely a clone. He is a carrier of memory, trauma, and resistance. Watching Xiao Zhan is like watching consciousness evolve in real time. His eyes hold more than instinct, they hold decisions. He chooses when to hide, when to confront, when to trust. And perhaps most tellingly, when not to retaliate. There's an ancientness in him that feels almost sacred, as if something long buried in the world has been reawakened within his silent, towering frame. What's remarkable is that Xiao Zhan never becomes a human substitute. The film doesn't fall into the easy trap of anthropomorphizing him. Instead, it honors his alienness, his unfamiliar grace. The way he kneels before Mei, or scratches symbols into the dirt, or simply disappears into shadow. He is unknowable, but only in the way that all truly sentient beings are. He does not want to become human. He wants to be seen as himself. Not a project, not a weapon, not a memory. Just him. And then there's Jian, the ghost in the machine. The man who sees too much and disappears too soon. At first, he appears almost peripheral, a quiet coder, hunched over his station, shadows under his eyes and urgency in his breath. But Jian is the first fracture in the polished lie of the Panda Plan. He doesn't deliver exposés or shout into microphones. He slides a thumb drive across a table. He whispers. He warns. And then he vanishes. But even in absence, he leaves fingerprints all over the story. It is his digital breadcrumbs that lead Mei toward the truth. It is his voice in the corrupted files that re-emerges, warning of a darkness hidden in the code. Jian represents conscience, the flickering moral voice within the machine. He is not a warrior or a leader, but something perhaps more essential, a witness. He chooses to look, even when it costs him everything. And in the second half, when he reappears weathered and changed, he is no longer merely a tech worker. He is a guardian, a defector, a man who now understands that some truths are worth burning your life down to protect. Director Lin, by contrast, is the film's embodiment of institutional rot. Cold, articulate, and impeccably dressed, he doesn't twirl a metaphorical mustache or indulge in cartoonish villainy. Instead, he smiles too calmly, speaks too rationally. He is the kind of man who justifies any cruelty as necessity. His belief in the Panda Plan is not born from malice, but from a deeper, more terrifying conviction that the ends always justify the means. He doesn't see Xiao Zhan as a being. He sees a glitch to be corrected, a system to be optimized. Lin is a reflection of a larger idea, that control disguised as compassion is still control. He cloaks himself in scientific language and ethical frameworks, but beneath it all, he is desperate to hold the reins, to own what he cannot understand. His inability to grasp the depth of Xiao Zhan's autonomy is what undoes him. In the end, Lin is left not defeated in battle, but outmatched in silence, left standing in a forest he cannot command, surrounded by creatures who no longer fear him. Another strange production decision was the use of infrasound. Takamoto had been fascinated with the way certain animals, including elephants and tigers, communicate using low-frequency sounds that humans can't hear but can feel. During key moments of the film, especially in the forest scenes, he had infrasound pulses embedded into the background track. The goal was to trigger a subconscious sense of unease, of being watched. Some early test audiences reported nausea, headaches, or the feeling of vertigo during these sequences. But instead of pulling the audio, Takamoto adjusted it, just enough to keep the sensation without overwhelming viewers. It wasn't about making the forest scary, he said. It was about making it aware. The film's most cryptic moment, Xiao Zhan bowing to director Lin, is actually a nod to an old Chinese folktale about a spirit beast who bows only to those it pities. The original script had Xiao Zhan roaring in defiance, but Takamoto changed it at the last moment. He brought Luan and the crew together and simply said, "No more anger." He's past that now. The change wasn't discussed again. But that moment became the soul of the film, a gesture that meant more than 1,000 lines of dialogue ever could. And yet, perhaps the strangest fact of all is what happened after the film wrapped. 3 months following the final day of filming, Takamoto disappeared for 2 weeks. His team reported he was unreachable. When he finally reappeared, he looked gaunt, sunburned, and carrying a bag full of SD cards. He never explained where he went, but some of the footage from the final montage, the long, unbroken shots of pandas moving through the mist, were taken from those cards. It wasn't from the film shoot, his editor later said. It was something else. But he wouldn't say where or how he got it. One final bit of trivia. There's a shot at the end of the credits, a single frame so brief most viewers miss it. It shows a bamboo grove, wind blowing gently, and in the distance, a figure. Not a panda. Not a person. Something in between. The studio claimed it was an editing error. But Takamoto smiled when asked about it. "There's always one that remembers," he said. In every layer of Panda Plan 2024, from its uncanny production history to the way it invites the audience to question memory itself, there lingers a strange hum, like the feeling that maybe the movie didn't end when the screen went black. Maybe it just stepped quietly into the forest, waiting to be found again. Or maybe, just maybe, it never left at all. There is something elusive in Panda Plan 2024, a lingering tension that hovers even after the credits roll, like fog that doesn't lift but simply settles deeper. It's a film that does not ask for easy interpretation, nor does it court applause with convenient catharsis. Instead, it invites its viewers into a slow, unraveling meditation on nature, memory, and control. The significant events that mark the film's progression do not explode, they echo. They leave behind traces, like footprints in mud you're not sure you actually saw. And that, in itself, is part of its spell. One of the first pivotal moments arrives quietly, shrouded not in spectacle but in loss. The death of Bai Yun, the aging matriarch panda at the heart of the Institute's neural mapping program, occurs not with violence or drama, but with clinical detachment. She dies during a routine sedation, off-screen. A beep on a monitor, a line that goes flat, a pair of latex gloves removed in silence. But critically, this is the moment the film begins to question its own ethics. From that point on, the audience is no longer in the comfortable realm of conservation. The warmth that the project once radiated, preserving an endangered species, cloning as a last resort, starts to chill. Something has shifted. The goal, once noble, has mutated. From a critical standpoint, Bai Yun's death represents a boundary line. It's the point where the emotional core begins to detach from the institutional machinery. And that detachment becomes the very soul of the film. Another moment that reverberates deeply is the revelation of Xiao Zhan's behavior. His erratic, inexplicable actions within the simulation and later, the wild. Scratching symbols in the dirt. Staring directly into cameras. Escaping without breaking anything. These aren't merely signs of cognitive dissonance. They are the film's quiet indictment of what happens when we manufacture life to fit an agenda. Xiao Zhan is not a malfunctioning creation. He is an awakening one. And that difference is where the entire thematic weight of the story rests. Critically, Xiao Zhan's resistance is not framed through action, but intention. In a cinematic landscape obsessed with kinetic rebellion, his choices stand in contrast. He doesn't roar or run wild. He stares. He watches. He refuses. It is a hauntingly passive resistance, and it speaks volumes. Here is a creature made in a lab, engineered for a specific role, yet he dares to dream. His dreams aren't heroic. They're confusing, abstract, even frightening. And that's what makes them human. Or rather, post-human. Something beyond. As the film peels away from the sterile white of laboratories and descends into the deep greens of the forest, another critical transition unfolds, not just in location, but in ideology. The forest doesn't just serve as a backdrop, it becomes a character. Alive, breathing, silently bearing witness. Within its dense quiet, Mei begins to see the truth, not from data charts or test logs, but through the natural dissonance of what she feels and what she's been taught to believe. Critics were quick to praise how the film uses space, particularly the forest, not as scenery, but as an emotional argument. The closer Mei moves toward the natural world, the further she drifts from the narrative she's been fed. Her shift is subtle. She never delivers a monologue. She never makes a rousing speech. Instead, we watch her gaze linger longer, her shoulders loosen, her footsteps grow more uncertain, more curious. The transition from control to surrender becomes her emotional arc, and it's executed with such restraint that it almost hides itself. A particularly lauded sequence comes when Mei, exhausted and half-lost in the forest, stumbles upon Xiao Zhan again. No words are exchanged. There's no chase, no threat. Just two beings, once intimately connected through sterile glass, now face-to-face in untamed nature. Xiao Zhan steps forward. Mei kneels. It's here that the film dares to pivot entirely. The dynamic between creator and subject, scientist and specimen, human and animal, collapses. What remains is something quieter and infinitely more profound: mutual recognition. This scene became a centerpiece in critical discussions because it encapsulates the film's central emotional paradox. How two different intelligences can communicate without language, without logic, purely through shared silence. It's not a moment of reconciliation, but of acknowledgement. Xiao Zhan is not forgiving. Mei is not apologizing. They are simply witnessing one another, and in that witnessing, the film finds its deepest resonance. Wei, the reluctant handler, is a quieter current in the story, but an important one. He begins as a company man, assigned to keep Mei in line, to escort and monitor. His background in the military is evident in his posture, his watchful gaze, the way he moves like someone who's learned to expect ambushes in every shadow. But there's a stillness in Wei that hints at something deeper, something wounded. He doesn't speak much, but when he does, there's weight to it. And as he follows Mei into the unknown, something shifts. He stops obeying and starts choosing. He protects her not out of duty, but belief. In her. In the cause. In Xiao Zhan. Wei's arc is one of quiet redemption. A man trained to obey who learns, finally, how to disobey. His injury during the final standoff is not framed as martyrdom, but as a consequence he accepts without regret. When Mei looks at him in those last moments, bleeding, breath shallow, there's no melodrama. Just mutual understanding. He found something worth breaking orders for. And in that, he finds peace. And somewhere within all of them, Mei, Jian, Wei, Lin, and even Xiao Zhan, exists the heartbeat of the story, the tension between memory and manipulation, between what is natural and what is manufactured. These characters are less pieces on a board and more echoes in a vast, silent debate about what it means to remember, to evolve, to choose your own story, even when that story has been written in someone else's code. The female panda in Jian's sanctuary, smaller and quieter than Xiao Zhan, adds a final note of grace to the character mosaic. She is not studied, not named by scientists. She is simply there, living, adapting. A symbol of hope, not for humanity's triumph, but for nature's resilience. She is the proof that not all progress must come at the cost of freedom. Each character in Panda Plan 2024 carries a different piece of that freedom. Mei gives it voice. Jian gives it warning. Rui gives it shield. Lin tries to bury it. And Xiao Zhan, he simply is it. Untamed, unresolved, and impossibly alive. In the end, the story doesn't tie them up with resolutions or tidy moral conclusions. Instead, it lets them breathe in the ambiguity. Mei doesn't become a hero in the public eye. Zhen doesn't lead a revolution. Rui fades into anonymity. And Xiao Zhan disappears back into the trees. But that's the beauty of it. Because true character is not in what a person says or even in what they do, but in what they remember and what they choose to carry forward when no one is watching. And somewhere deep in the wilderness, pandas with old eyes and new minds look back at the world that made them and choose, for now, not to return. There are films that unfold not just on the screen but in the spaces between takes, in hushed conversations between crew members, in the eerie quiet of a forest that isn't supposed to be silent, in the moment a light flickers for no reason at all. Panda Plan 2024 is one of those films. A story that didn't just feel uncanny in its plot, but carried that same strangeness into its very bones. From the day the first clapperboard snapped to the final shot of Xiao Zhan's piercing eyes, this wasn't a movie that simply got made, it haunted its way into existence. It began, oddly enough, with a real panda. The director, Junji Takamoto, a Japanese-Korean filmmaker known for his emotionally elusive narratives, was visiting the Wulong National Nature Reserve years before Panda Plan even had a name. It was during a night hike, something typically forbidden to outsiders, that he saw a panda watching him from the edge of a clearing. Not moving. Not blinking. Just watching. He later said the moment stayed with him like a dream you can't wake from. He returned to Tokyo with no footage, no photos, just a single line scribbled in his notebook, "What if it remembers us?" That line would become the thematic seed for the film. The screenplay took over 5 years to write. It went through 17 drafts, 3 co-writers, and 2 translators before arriving at its final form. At one point, the original script had the pandas speaking in a post-apocalyptic future where human language had been implanted into their cognitive matrix. The idea was scrapped not because it lacked ambition, but because Takamoto decided it was too human. He didn't want the pandas to echo us. He wanted them to resist us. Silence, he later said, was the most powerful voice they could have. Filming began in late 2022 in a forest just outside Jushaegu, an area known for its kaleidoscopic lakes and dense, untracked terrain. The production team built a fully functional base camp there, complete with solar power grids and a self-contained food and water system. They planned to be there for 4 months. They stayed for nearly 9. Why? Because strange things kept happening. Actors would report hearing rustling long after everyone had turned in. Cameras would roll on their own. A boom mic, left hanging during a break, recorded what sounded like low breathing for 47 seconds, except no one had been near it. One production assistant reportedly quit after claiming she saw a panda in the forest watching her for 3 hours straight without ever moving. "It wasn't blinking," she told the crew through tears. "It just knew I was there. Of course, wildlife can behave oddly. But the frequency with which cast and crew whispered about feeling observed became unsettling enough that Takamoto eventually leaned into it. He asked the actors to journal each night before bed, not about their performances, but about what they felt in the forest. He later incorporated excerpts from those journals into Xiao Zhan's behavior notes in the film, blurring the lines between production fiction and lived experience. One of the strangest behind-the-scenes details involves the panda footage itself. Though many assumed Xiao Zhan was a CGI creation, too precise, too expressive to be real, the reality is far more complicated. The production used a mix of real panda footage, animatronics, and a full-body animatronic suit controlled by a combination of motion capture and puppeteering. The actor inside the suit, Kenta Sho, had a background in Buto, a form of Japanese dance theater known for its eerie, controlled movements. His performance was so uncanny that some members of the crew reportedly refused to be on set when he was in full gear, especially during the nighttime shoots. "It didn't feel like watching a man pretend to be a panda," one camera operator said. It felt like watching something remember being human. The animatronic suit itself, nicknamed Zhang Wei, was designed with over 130 micro-actuators and a flexible synthetic fur that responded to temperature and moisture. The eyes were fully animatronic, capable of dilation and complex movement. The most unnerving detail? They programmed the eyes to follow certain crew members at random intervals, just to simulate unpredictable behavior. The result was a panda that didn't just look alive, it felt sentient. In fact, during a particularly intense scene where Mei first meets Xiao Zhan in the forest, the actor playing Mei, Luan, was reportedly unaware that the suit would be fully active during the take. Her reaction, hesitation, awe, a single tear rolling down her cheek, was completely unplanned. "I genuinely didn't know if it was animatronic or something else," she said in an interview. "For a second, I thought it might be real. Or worse, half real." Critically, the inclusion of the microdrive Jian left behind, containing neural overlays tied to military projects, expands the film's reach beyond conservation. It dives into geopolitics, historical trauma, and the commodification of intelligence. The revelation that the panda's consciousness is intertwined with fragments of human war memory is devastating, not because it adds danger, but because it exposes how deeply humanity tries to dominate not just life, but thought. The Panda Plan was not simply a cloning project, it was an attempt to overwrite instinct with strategy, nature with war. This moment reframes everything that came before. The erratic behavior isn't random, it's inherited. The drawings Xiao Zhan scratches into the dirt? Possibly tactical schematics. The fear in his eyes? Not of captivity, but of a memory that doesn't belong to him. And suddenly, the line between animal and human blurs completely. Critics have called this the film's ethical fracture, a point where audiences are no longer able to situate themselves comfortably as humans watching animals. Instead, we're implicated. We're the source of the infection. The climax, when Lin finally tracks Xiao Zhan and attempts to reassert dominance through violence, is not explosive. There are no orchestral swells. No triumphant reversals. What happens is painfully restrained. Xiao Zhan does not attack. He bows. Critics dissected this gesture endlessly. Was it submission? Was it mockery? Was it pity? The interpretation is left open, but the effect is undeniable. For a brief, searing moment, Lin realizes he is not the apex predator in this forest. He is the aberration. Xiao Zhan, by refusing violence, exerts a kind of power Lin can't comprehend. The bow becomes an act of sovereignty, a declaration that autonomy exists even in silence. What makes this moment even more powerful is its refusal to reward violence. Most films, especially those circling themes of resistance, allow for the satisfaction of revenge. But Panda Plan 2024 offers no such comfort. The panda walks away. The antagonist is not defeated by might but erased by irrelevance. Critics saw this as a deliberate subversion of genre norms. The story refuses to deliver vengeance. Instead, it offers consequence. In the film's final stretch, Mei doesn't become a hero. She doesn't publish an exposé. She doesn't return to the world with fire in her eyes. She finds a sanctuary far off the grid, and simply lives there, watching the pandas thrive in secrecy. This decision, so minimal, so quiet, was both celebrated and critiqued. Some saw it as anticlimactic, others as the only honest conclusion. The film, after all, isn't about defeating systems. It's about escaping them. Not through revolution, but through retreat. Through refusal. And this is where the film's emotional resonance lingers most deeply. It does not deliver a manifesto. It delivers a wound. And within that wound, it plants a question. What do we become when the things we create begin to remember us? From a thematic perspective, memory is not just a motif, it is the very architecture of the film. Whether it's the pandas recalling something they never lived, or Mei confronting the buried costs of her work, or the ghosts of Jian's research haunting every frame of corrupted footage, Panda Plan 2024 insists that nothing is ever truly forgotten. And this insistence creates a slow-burning horror, not of ghosts, but of consequences. Critics compared the film's tone to Stalker, Under the Skin, and The Mirror, works that aren't concerned with resolution but with residue. The idea that certain images or sounds or silences can stay with us long after we leave the theater. The ripple of bamboo. The blink of animatronic eyes. The low hum of memory trying to surface. Even the ending, with its ambiguous post-credits frame, a still image of a figure half hidden in a grove, invites interpretation without explanation. Is it another panda? A new hybrid? A dream? No answers are given. Only the eerie invitation to wonder, what's left when the forest watches back? In the months following its release, Panda Plan 2024 became a cultural touchstone for discussions on bioethics, artificial intelligence, and ecological grief. Not because it provided solutions, but because it forced audiences to sit in discomfort, to face the truth that sometimes our best intentions are nothing more than veils over systems of control. And perhaps, most importantly, the film whispers this. There are some silences that aren't empty. They're listening. The making of Panda Plan 2024 didn't unfold like a traditional shoot. It didn't thrive in the controlled echo chambers of soundstages or the polished, caffeinated precision of backlit studios. Instead, it grew in the hush of mist-covered forests, in makeshift production tents battered by wind, in silent glances between crew members who began to feel like they weren't merely filming a story, but living inside one. From the first table read to the final rendering of Xiao Zhan's watchful eyes, the production felt touched by something almost otherworldly. Whether it was the landscape, the subject matter, or the unpredictable blend of high technology and raw nature, something about this film never played by the rules. The journey began with a risk. Junji Takamoto, the enigmatic director whose name had been whispered around international film circles after his arthouse success Cloud Mirror, was offered a sizable budget from an indie-backed but globally distributed studio in South Korea. But Takamoto, with his usual gentle obstinance, had one condition. The majority of the film had to be shot on location in active panda conservation zones in China. No blue screen. No CGI forests. No studio-controlled wildlife settings. He wanted unpredictability. He wanted authenticity. He wanted, in his own words, the chaos of truth. And so the team found themselves deep in Sichuan province, where the terrain was less forgiving than any production schedule had anticipated. The forest didn't care for call sheets. It swallowed signals, tangled wires, and played strange games with sound. Cinematographer Eloise Tran, known for her dreamlike use of natural light, said in interviews that her job felt more like hunting ghosts than composing shots. The forest would allow only what it chose to reveal. Every frame felt stolen, she said, like the trees could change their minds at any moment. One early challenge was capturing the presence of the pandas themselves. Real pandas, even in conservation areas, are notoriously shy and are monitored under strict regulations. The crew was granted unprecedented access under the condition that they follow an intensive month-long training protocol, learning how to move through the terrain without disturbing the environment, how to remain unseen, and most importantly, how to wear panda suits. Yes, real panda suits. Not costumes in the theatrical sense, but scientifically accurate, scent-masked disguises that researchers wear to help prevent panda cubs from imprinting on humans. The sight of the camera crew stumbling through bamboo in oversized black and white suits became a source of endless laughter within the team, but it also produced something unexpected. In those suits, under the sweltering heat and insect-choked air, the crew began to feel different, detached from their roles, more animal than observer. It changed the way we filmed, said Assistant Director Yun Park. We stopped trying to frame pandas. We started trying to see like them. Despite these challenges, or perhaps because of them, Some of the film's most iconic visuals came directly from real encounters. The shot of Xiao Zhan staring directly into the lens, his face half in shadow, wasn't planned. It happened during a lull in shooting when the animatronic wasn't even deployed. A real panda, later named Zhao by the crew, had wandered into the peripheral zone and paused, as if considering whether to interrupt the human performance underway. The camera had been rolling for calibration. The result? One of the most haunting human-like gazes in the entire film, used almost untouched in the final cut. Not all shots, however, could be achieved in the wild. For the scenes involving close interactions between Mei and Xiao Zhan, especially moments requiring complex emotional cues, the production used Zhan Wei, a hyper-advanced animatronic panda suit engineered by a team that had previously worked on The Revenant and War for the Planet of the Apes. The actor inside the suit, Kenta Sho, was a trained Buto performer, selected not just for his physical discipline but for his understanding of stillness. Takamoto insisted Xiao Zhan's intelligence should emerge not in action, but in pause. In the weight of a breath, the tilt of the head, a refusal to move. Kenta spent over 2 months living with researchers before shooting began, studying real pandas, how they blinked, how they recoiled from sound, how their heads followed scent before sight. During shooting, he never once broke character. He refused to eat with the crew. He slept in a separate tent. He communicated in gestures and would only enter scenes when fully suited. His dedication became the quiet mythology of the set, and his performance blurred the line so completely that on more than one occasion, visiting consultants mistook him for a real animal. The animatronic itself was another marvel. Controlled through a hybrid system of internal puppetry and external motion tracking, it required a 4-person team to operate in real time, each responsible for a different part of Xiao Zhan's body. The eyes, in particular, were engineered to respond to subtle environmental changes. They could narrow in response to sudden light, dilate when triggered by movement. But here's the strangest detail. Mid-production, the eye actuators began to twitch on their own during nighttime storage. At first, the team assumed it was a programming glitch, until they realized the twitches matched ambient sound fluctuations. It was as if it was dreaming, said one of the robotics engineers. Which, of course, is impossible. Sound design also played a pivotal role in shaping the film's emotional texture. Composer Atsuko Hanaka crafted a score made almost entirely from field recordings: wind through bamboo, the rumble of distant thunder, the low growl of a waking panda. These sounds were layered with deep sub-frequencies that were often felt more than heard. Hanaka spent 3 weeks camped in a soundproof hut in the forest just to capture what she called the breath of the earth. One haunting touch? Several key audio cues were buried beneath the 20 Hz threshold, inaudible to the ear but used to trigger a visceral unease in the body. Viewers later described feeling disoriented during certain scenes without knowing why. And then there was the forest itself. The crew swore it changed. Not in the way all wild places shift with light and wind, but subtly, deliberately. Paths that existed one morning were gone the next. A stand of trees used for a tracking shot suddenly blocked by growth that hadn't been there the day before. A drone that lost its GPS signal and circled the same clearing for 40 minutes, its camera capturing only mist and the faint outline of something moving just beneath the canopy. One night, the assistant editor was reviewing dailies alone in a tent when the footage began to loop, not by human command, but spontaneously. The same few frames of Xiao Zhan turning toward the lens, played over and over. On the 8th loop, his head stopped halfway, mid-turn, something that didn't happen in any of the takes. A flicker. A blink. And then the footage resumed. The editor didn't sleep that night. No one touched the raw files again until the final edit. It wasn't all uncanny occurrences. Some memories from the production were pure joy. During breaks, crew members often played a game called Guess the Panda, where they had to identify whether the creature on screen was real, animatronic, or Kenta in suit. More than half the time, even veteran trainers failed to get it right. One crew member, believing she was petting a real panda behind the scenes, was stunned when Kenta stood up and bowed silently before walking away on 2 legs. "I screamed so loud I cried," she said, laughing. "He was too good." The production also built a panda safe house on location, half studio, half wildlife recovery station, where any pandas accidentally disturbed by the shoot could be brought for care. The space was eventually used in the actual film, doubling as Jian's hidden sanctuary. In a full-circle moment, one of the cubs born in that safe house during production was named Xiang Wei, in honor of the 2 central characters. She was later released into the wild. When filming finally wrapped, no one wanted to leave. Not just because of the work, but because the world they'd built felt like it had swallowed them. The lines between fiction and reality, creature and character, director and dreamer, all of it blurred. The final shot, Xiao Zhan standing motionless in the fog as the camera pulls away, wasn't scripted to end that way. Takamoto had written a sequence where he'd turn and vanish into the trees. But Kenta, standing there in silence, simply didn't move. The fog thickened. The wind blew. And Takamoto whispered, "Cut." He never did walk away. Later, Takamoto told the press that making Panda Plan 2024 felt less like creating a story and more like revealing one that had always existed, hidden in bark and memory, waiting to be remembered. "We didn't write this film," he said. "We just listened long enough to hear it." And perhaps that's the magic buried inside every frame. It's not just the precision of the craft or the brilliance of the performances. It's the feeling that the movie didn't come from people, it came through them. As if somewhere, just beyond the reach of the lens, something older, quieter, and much more patient was watching. And it was ready to be seen. In Panda Plan 2024, the world itself feels like a living character, breathing, shifting, watching. The setting does not simply cradle the story, it composes it. Each frame is soaked in atmosphere, each location curated not for spectacle but for resonance. Whether within the glassy sterility of a futuristic research lab or the hushed stillness of mist-laden forests, the film's environments speak in whispers, shaping the mood like unseen hands sculpting fog. The result is a cinematic experience that doesn't just show a story unfolding, it feels it, like breath in your ear or a shadow moving just outside your peripheral vision. It begins in Shanghai, but not the version tourists know. This is a Shanghai filtered through disquiet. The skyline is still there, a jagged silhouette of glass and steel rising against the gray morning sky, but it hums differently. There's a hush beneath the buzz, a kind of softened unease. The streets are too clean. The people too quiet. Even the reflections in the windows seem to delay slightly, as if remembering before responding. It's here that we first meet Mei Zhao, walking down corridors lit not with warm light but with that pale, flickering fluorescence reserved for hospital basements and interrogation rooms. These scenes are filmed in a palette of steel blue and dusted whites, everything clinical, distant, precise. The lab, the National Biogenetics Institute, is a marvel of production design. It's not sterile in the cliché sense. It breathes with artificial life. Walls pulse faintly with embedded data panels. Monitors hum with screensaver-like neural patterns that drift across the glass like meditative art pieces. Every door swishes, but softly. Every sound is deliberate. The set doesn't scream science fiction. Instead, it whispers containment. This is a world that wants to believe it's in control. Cinematographer Eloise Tran's lens in these early scenes is restrained, almost reverent. Shots linger a fraction longer than expected, letting silence pool in the corners. Long takes glide through the lab's corridors like ghosts, evoking a sense of waiting, not for something to happen, but for something to remember. There are very few handheld shots in this section. Everything is locked down, symmetrical, as though the camera itself is afraid to step out of line. It mirrors Mei's place in the world, composed, restrained, drifting towards something unspoken. And then the film shifts. When Mei ventures into the wilderness, the aesthetic breathes open like a lung. The tight geometry of Shanghai gives way to the organic chaos of the Sichuan forest, and with it, the entire cinematic language transforms. The first establishing shot of the forest reserve is deliberately jarring. There's no score, no dramatic cue, just a sudden stillness, and then the camera slowly rising over a valley where bamboo sways like a choir of serpents. The light is different here. It doesn't reflect. It absorbs. Sunlight filters through the trees in thick, gold slats that move with the wind, giving the impression that time itself has slowed. This forest, never named, never explained, becomes the film's soul. It is more than a backdrop. It's a memory. A place out of sync with the rest of the world. Even in daylight, there's a dimness to it, like twilight frozen in time. The production team spent months scouting locations untouched by tourism, and it shows. The paths feel unmarked, the silence untrained. It's as though the forest is a place where stories don't begin but return. Tran's camera in the forest becomes looser, dreamlike. The once rigid framing relaxes into slow, floating movements. Shots are composed with negative space in mind, branches interrupting the frame, shadows lingering just long enough to make you doubt what you saw. The use of deep focus is frequent. Even when Mei is centered, there's always something stirring in the background, just slightly out of reach. This creates a tension without noise, a suspense born from presence rather than threat. You feel the forest watching, without ever seeing eyes. Lighting plays an enormous role in shaping this tone. Natural light is embraced wherever possible, often enhanced only by reflective panels and diffusion nets hidden in the trees. When artificial light is used, such as during the night scenes in Jian's hideout, it's soft, warm, flickering from solar lamps and firelight, creating stark contrast with the cold luminosity of the lab. This duality between warm and cool, natural and synthetic, is a recurring visual motif. The lab's blue-white glare versus the forest's amber shadows. The screen's pixelated memories versus the organic blur of a breath in fog. Each informs the other. Each defines the stakes. And then there's the mist. If the forest is the soul of the film, then the mist is its breath. It becomes a recurring element, weaving through nearly every major emotional beat in the second half. Sometimes it blankets the bamboo floor like a ghost at rest. Other times it swirls violently, stirred by Xiao Zhan's passing. There are moments where the mist is used to obscure, to distort perspective. Characters disappear into it, voices echo unpredictably. But at its most powerful, it reveals. It creates a softness through which clarity emerges, not of sight, but of meaning. When Mei and Xiao Zhan share their final scene together, surrounded by drifting fog, it feels less like a conclusion and more like a memory finding its way home. One of the most haunting uses of environment comes during a sequence where Mei tracks Xiao Zhan's signal into a forgotten glade, a wide clearing ringed with dead bamboo, the ground covered in charred soil. Nothing moves. The trees here are scorched, lifeless, yet stand tall like mourners at a funeral. It's the first time we get a sense of the destruction the Panda Plan might have already caused. This place is never explained. No exposition is given. But its presence is thunderous. The camera doesn't rush through it. It lingers, gliding low across the burnt terrain as the wind howls, unscored. It's in this silence that the audience realizes what's at stake. Not just memory. Not just ethics. The world. And this unspoken dread carries into the architectural design of the Hidden Facility 9, an underground complex introduced in the film's third act. The contrast with the forest could not be more jarring. This space is all concrete and lightless corridors, glass cells, thick metal doors. The sound design becomes muffled, as though the air itself is heavy. When Xiao Zhan is seen inside the observation chamber, the lighting is clinical, overexposed, casting the panda's body in harsh shadows, his face devoid of warmth. It's a visual indictment, framing him not as an animal but as an artifact. And it's precisely this treatment that makes his final act, bowing, then disappearing into the wild, so powerful. He chooses to return to the world that breathes. One particularly unforgettable shot captures this transition. Xiao Zhang, seen through the window of the facility, steps backward into the shadows, frame by frame, until the light catches only his eyes, and then not even that. The frame is held for 10 full seconds. Then black. Even the use of color in Panda Plan 2024 feels sculpted, not designed. The palette moves in phases. Icy and sterile in the city, earthy and layered in the forest, then scorched and metallic in the facility. But it's not simply visual flair. It's emotional temperature. The color tells us how to feel when the characters don't speak. The forest's greens aren't just beautiful, they're mournful. The lab's whites aren't clean, they're cold. The burnt glade isn't dead, it's remembering. And through it all, there's the near-total absence of score. Takamoto made the decision early on to rely on natural soundscapes. When music is used, it drifts in quietly. Minimal piano motifs, a rising string beneath silence, a single note held too long. But most of the time, the film trusts its visuals. Trusts the wind through leaves, the crack of bamboo, the way light filters through fog. In doing so, it invites the audience into the setting, not just as observers, but as participants. By the final act, when Mei walks through the forest for the last time, the camera behind her handheld and shaking slightly, the audience no longer needs explanations. The setting has taught us its language. We know what the rustling of the leaves means. We know what it means when the mist gathers low. We recognize the shape of Xiao Zhang, even before he appears. And when the film fades to its final frame, bamboo swaying in rhythm, light catching on dew, something half seen in the distance, we realize that this was never about spectacle. Never about the creature or the lab or the chase. It was always about place. A place that remembers. A place that, if you stand still long enough, might remember you. If you ask anyone who worked on Panda Plan 2024 what it felt like to be on set, they'll pause first. Not because they're unsure how to describe it, but because they're remembering something they're not quite sure how to explain. Not just a shoot. Not just a film. Something stranger. Something quieter. Like being part of a secret whispered in the middle of a dream. The production, by every standard measure, was grueling. The idea was born from director Junji Takamoto's insistence on immersion, on erasing the line between environment and story, actor and character, set and soul. He didn't want to simulate a world. He wanted to enter one. And for that, the cast and crew had to follow him into the mist. They began in Shanghai, shooting the clinical opening scenes at a real biomedical facility on the outskirts of the city, one that had been closed for renovation. The institute's vast glass corridors and eerily white labs lent the perfect authenticity. But even there, Takamoto avoided conventional setups. He discouraged the use of artificial lighting, asking instead that scenes be lit only by what the building itself naturally offered. Overhead fluorescence, computer glow, the occasional slant of daylight through sealed windows. "Don't light the characters," he told his cinematographer Eloise Tran. "Light what's watching them." It was during those early days that the crew began to notice Takamoto's peculiar methods. He never used a director's chair. He stood barefoot whenever they were shooting. He rarely gave verbal direction, opting instead to hand actors small pieces of paper with phrases scribbled in pencil. "Remember the thing you didn't say. Breathe like you've been holding your breath for 10 years. You're not walking forward, you're walking into a memory." These cryptic notes became legend among the cast, traded like fortunes, folded into pockets like talismans. Luan, who played Mei Zhao, initially struggled with this. A perfectionist and classically trained stage actress, she came prepared, lines memorized, emotional beats mapped, backstory thoroughly researched. But Takamoto dismantled all of it. He told her to unlearn. "The panda doesn't care how you feel," he said in their first rehearsal. "The forest won't wait for your motivation." She later described the experience as terrifying and liberating. She began carrying a small field notebook, not to script her scenes, but to sketch how the light looked each morning. That, she said, was how she found Mei, by watching shadows move. The shift to the forest was both literal and spiritual. The crew moved into the mountains of Sichuan, living in a hand-built base camp that functioned more like a commune than a film set. There were no trailers, no high-speed Wi-Fi, and no cell reception for miles. Days started with tea around a communal fire and ended with story circles where cast and crew could speak not just about the production, but about dreams they'd had. Yes, dreams. Takamoto encouraged everyone to keep dream journals. He believed the forest would begin to seep into their subconscious, and that those dreams would help shape the unspoken language of the film. One night, a young gaffer dreamt that the bamboo was breathing. He described the stalks expanding and contracting, each exhale rustling the leaves, each inhale pulling fog from the valley. The next day, Takamoto rewrote a scene around that idea. The camera was lowered to ground level, panning slowly as the mist rolled in over the roots. That moment ended up in the final cut, unscored, uninterrupted, unforgettable. The animatronic panda, Zhang Wei, quickly became the odd celebrity of the set. Designed with 160 micromotors and covered in realistic synthetic fur, the creature had its own tent, its own handler, and, unofficially, its own personality. The puppeteers named it Bao, and began assigning it moods depending on the day's shoot. Today Bao is shy, one would say. He needs time. Bao is grumpy, another would announce. Too many takes. It was more than play. The actors responded to Bao not as a puppet, but as a presence. Luan often found herself talking to it between takes, forgetting there were 4 people operating it in unison beneath the surface. Once, during a particularly foggy shoot near the riverbed, Bao malfunctioned. Its eyes locked onto a fixed point in the distance and began to blink in a slow, rhythmic pattern. The puppeteers tried resetting the controls. Nothing changed. Then the servos began to whir, softly, then louder, until the panda turned its head just slightly, and stopped. It stared at the fog for 36 seconds, unmoving, before finally going limp. Takamoto, instead of calling for a fix, whispered, "Print it." That footage became the moment Xiao Zhan senses the presence of the humans for the first time. Not everything was ethereal and serene. There were real hardships. A week-long storm once flooded part of the camp, forcing everyone to huddle in the bamboo rehearsal tent, playing card games by candlelight. Rain washed out half the set on day 28, delaying the shooting schedule by nearly 2 weeks. They lost a camera drone in a ravine. A sound technician came down with pneumonia. At one point, they were so short on fresh vegetables that meals consisted of congee, mushrooms, and instant coffee for 5 straight days. But there was a strange camaraderie to it all. No one left. No one wanted to. Even when the studio offered a temporary pullback to reset in a nearby town, the cast and crew voted unanimously to stay. Not everything was ethereal and serene. There were real hardships. A week-long storm once flooded part of the camp, forcing everyone to huddle in the bamboo rehearsal tent, playing card games by candlelight. Rain washed out half the set on day 28, delaying the shooting schedule by nearly 2 weeks. They lost a camera drone in a ravine. A sound technician came down with pneumonia. At one point, they were so short on fresh vegetables that meals consisted of congee, mushrooms, and instant coffee for 5 straight days. But there was a strange camaraderie to it all. No one left. No one wanted to. Even when the studio offered a temporary pullback to reset in a nearby town, the cast and crew voted unanimously to stay. "It was like we were under a spell," said Assistant Director Yun Park. "Or maybe we just felt like if we left, we wouldn't be able to find our way back." Actor Kenta Sho, who performed in the animatronic panda suit, was perhaps the most transformed. A Buto-trained physical artist, he approached the role not as mimicry but as embodiment. He studied videos of panda movement at half speed. He practiced breathing techniques to match their resting rhythm. He spent hours lying in the forest, eyes closed, listening to wind move through the canopy. On the final day of shooting, when Xiao Zhan disappears into the mist, Kenta remained in the suit long after Takamoto yelled, "Cut!" The camera kept rolling. No one moved. The fog thickened. And then, finally, he turned and walked into the trees, unscripted. That shot became the film's final image. The crew followed rituals. They placed bamboo at the edge of the set each morning. They burned incense when filming emotionally intense scenes. They observed a moment of silence whenever a real panda was spotted, even from a distance. Some of it was respect. Some of it was superstition. All of it was belief. Belief that they were not alone out there. That the story they were telling was not entirely theirs. One of the most beloved moments among the cast came unexpectedly during a break. A spontaneous celebration was thrown after the 50th day of filming. Someone had smuggled in a small Bluetooth speaker, and before long, the bamboo grove was filled with music. Soft jazz, traditional Korean folk, even a little 90s pop. Crew members danced barefoot. A generator-powered fairy lights strung between the trees. Kenta danced too, still half in costume, his panda head off but his paws still on. Luan sang an old lullaby from her grandmother. Takamoto simply sat on a stump, watching, smiling, whispering to himself. Later, someone asked what he was thinking in that moment. He said, "I was hoping the forest would remember us kindly." When post-production began, the team relocated to a small facility on Jeju Island. Even in editing, Takamoto maintained his peculiar approach. Scenes were reviewed silently first, without score, without dialogue. He wanted to feel them before hearing them. Some scenes were reshaped entirely because they felt wrong, even if they technically worked. He cut over 40 minutes of footage, including a subplot involving a second clone, because he said it was trying too hard to be understood. In the final mix, he brought back the infrasound, low-frequency pulses that are more felt than heard. Mixed into forest scenes, they created a sensation of presence, one that audiences wouldn't consciously register, but would carry with them long after leaving the theater. The premiere was held not in a city, but in a clearing. A private screening for cast, crew, and a handful of supporters, shown on a projection screen strung between trees, with the forest behind them. No press. No red carpet. Just people in coats, wrapped in blankets, sitting on folding chairs under the stars. When the film ended, there was no applause. Just silence. A respectful, aching, full silence. And then, far off in the dark, a sound. Branches moving. Leaves rustling. Someone whispered, "Bow," and everyone laughed. But no one turned around. The themes of Panda Plan 2024 do not declare themselves loudly. They do not arrive with speeches or title cards. They emerge like patterns in mist, like shapes slowly surfacing from beneath still water. You do not see them at first, you feel them. And then, after the film has long since ended, they begin to follow you, quietly. A phrase that lingers. A gesture that replays. A question that wasn't answered, and perhaps wasn't meant to be. At its heart, the film is a meditation on memory, its beauty, its burden, and its malleability. From the very first scene, when Mei Zhao steps through the lab's hushed corridors, surrounded by glass walls that reflect her from every angle, the film is already asking, what is remembered? And what is rewritten? The Panda Plan itself, under the guise of preservation, is built on an obsession with memory. Not just the biological kind, but the emotional kind. The aim was never simply to replicate pandas. It was to restore them. To bring back not just bodies, but minds. To recreate instincts, relationships, fears, dreams. But in doing so, the line between preservation and manipulation is quietly obliterated. Xiao Zhan, the film's central enigma, becomes the vessel for this question. He is not just a clone. He is a memory made flesh. His every action, His hesitation, his gaze, his patterns of movement, suggests a haunting interiority. He remembers things he never lived. He dreams in images that aren't his. He becomes the embodiment of a soul that has inherited someone else's life. Through him, the film explores the terrifying and tender weight of ancestral memory. What happens when we inherit not just DNA, but pain? What happens when we try to correct nature with intention, only to find that intention itself cannot be trusted? Symbolically, Xiao Zhan is more than a panda. He is memory made conscious. His very existence is an elegy for every extinct species, every lost forest, every cultural scar buried under the clean sheen of modernity. When he draws patterns into the soil, they are not just symbols, they are echoes, fragments, archetypes. At one point, Mei finds him tracing what resembles an ancient Chinese oracle bone script. The moment is never explained. It doesn't need to be. The suggestion is enough. That the past is bleeding through. That nothing, no matter how deeply hidden in the code, truly disappears. And then there is silence. Silence in Panda Plan 2024 is not just absence, it is language. It is chosen. It is deliberate. Mei is a character of few words. Xiao Zhan speaks none. Jian leaves behind whispers in corrupted files. The film rarely tells us what characters think. Instead, it shows us what they choose not to say. In this way, silence becomes a theme of restraint, a refusal to define what should remain unnamed, a resistance to the noise of certainty. The film's quietest moments, Mei kneeling in the forest, Xiao Zhan pausing at the edge of the mist, are also its most profound. They echo the emotional truth that some realizations are too large for language. They must be felt, carried, witnessed.